Welcome to the WA Property Q&A, the podcast where I explore the ins and outs of buying property in Western Australia. I'm your host, Peter Fletcher, and each week I interview local property experts to help you to develop a deep understanding of the nuances of buying property in WA. From market trends to legal considerations, no topic is off limits. But before we dive in, a friendly reminder. While we provide valuable information, it's important to note that nothing discussed in this podcast should be construed as personal investment advice. Always remember to seek the appropriate professional advice for your specific circumstances. Now, let's get started and unlock the secrets to successful property buying in WA. Welcome to another episode of the WA Property Q&A podcast. And with me today is none other than Robert Mandanici, Vice President of REIWA, Principal of Paddington Realty. Realty, is that right? Yes, good. And ex-Victorian, still a Carlton Blues fan, but we won't hold that against him for too long. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, what's on the agenda for real estate this week?
Busy week. I think that almost final run towards Christmas and the end of year. So just pulling a lot of, I won't say last minute deals together, but, a lot of people who have had that thought going, oh, we need to get that done, or let's get that on the market, or let's get that off the market, or, let's get that lease done. So there's been a bit of that this week so far.
I wanted to talk about, Rob, because it sort of caught my attention and interest, is this idea coming out of Victoria of mandating the compulsory disclosure of the auction reserve price prior to auction day. You're a Victorian. You've had a lot of experience in this space. What's your thoughts? What are you hearing around the trap?
Look, I think, and I think we clarified that ex-Victorian now.
No, you're still a
Well,
Victorian, Robert. You still barrack for Carlton.
And much to your fans' disgust, not doing much better than West Coast this year, I think. So we'll see how that goes. Someone said to me the other day, might have been you, if you finished 14th, you'd be happy.
I'll be happy if West Coast finish 14 this year.
Be happy with a 14 as well for Carlton. So let's see how we go there. But yeah, talking about Victorian auctions or auctions more broadly, I think the government intervention here, I think, is a bit of an own goal. And I know I say that a lot about government intervention, but this one here, I think people might finally...
This is the Victorian intervention.
Yeah, I think people might finally realise that auction isn't the big evil that everyone says it is. And think about it in its purest form. You take 15 or 20 people and we all get out on the front lawn on a Saturday afternoon or a Saturday morning, and one person stands at the front calling for bids. You don't get more transparent than that. So if I'm standing in the crowd and you're standing in the crowd, I know what your maximum is on the day. Now, it may not be all you were willing to pay, and that's a slightly different argument here, and we'll get to that one. But from a purchaser's perspective, from a buyer's perspective, it's open, it's transparent. I'm sitting there going, well, Peter, or I don't know if you're Peter, or it's this guy next to me, he's at $1 million. I don't want to spend any more than $1 million, so I'm out. Peter gets it. Or if Peter's making all the noises and agitations that at $1 million he's looking stressed and he's looking like he's at his wit's end, and maybe his partner's tugging on his arm saying, don't bid anymore, and then you're standing there, you know that maybe another $10,000 will do it or $5,000 will do it. I think what disclosing the reserve does is it's going to take away, I think, that transparency. And I know that might sound a little strange in that the government's come to this decision in the efforts of transparency, but I think what it's going to do is it's probably going to push auctions down a little bit. I think buyers and sellers might just opt more towards private treaty methods.
You mean sellers will
Correct.
Opt towards private treaty?
To some degree that's going to force, buyers into that mindset of avoiding auction, perhaps even more than some do. Yeah. So I think that's probably where it's going to go.
So some time ago, there was this when a property reached reserve, the auctioneer would announce the property is on the market and will be sold today.
Correct.
And then there was a group of auctioneers that said, well, there is no requirement for us to disclose when the reserve had been met. And so you had this, the people in the audience, well, is it on the market? Is it not on the market? And the auctioneer would say, you just need to make your highest and best offer right now, because when the gavel comes down, it is sold. It kind of forcing people to disclose the reserve takes that whole conversation away, because now everyone knows when it's hit the reserve. Is that a bad thing? Why would that be a bad thing?
Look, I think having that disclosure at the point of auction is important.
Mm-hmm.
So in the heat of the moment, I think it is very important for the auctioneer at the point when the reserve has been met is to give that signal that we are on the market. And I think that's important. That's important for a number of reasons.
So could you say that should be legislated?
Yes.
Right.
I think so.
There's going to be some agents hate you now.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's an important distinction. And there's plenty of ways to control the crowd, and the crowd will always want to know. Bidders will always want to know, are we on the market? Mm-hmm. And they'll do everything during the conduct of that auction to find out, because it's human nature. So there's a little bit going on there, I guess, in the buyer's mind. And someone in the crowd will think, well, as long as I know when we're on the market, I've got an advantage over the next person. And I think that's just human nature. We're all like that. No one wants to overpay, fear of overpaying. And I think you often get that after an auction. The buyer or sometimes the underbidder might be relieved, going, oh, wow, I really got pushed, and I'm so glad I didn't go that extra little bit. But, at times you'll have the bidder as well, maybe sometimes questioning, did they overpay? So I think there's human nature in wanting to know, are we on the market? I think, however, taking that a week out is really going to take the sting out of the campaign and may actually result in properties not being sold at auction, both slowing the whole process down, but also, again, in the buyer's mind, returning to private treaty. And I really think we'll see a push to private treaty. Now, a totally opposite scenario to the auction is the private treaty. Now, there may be a push there, to go sort of delve further. Campaigns, may get longer. Does that necessarily result in what the government's aim is here? And my understanding, the government's aim here is, to address the housing crisis this way, potentially, to make home prices cheaper. And I just don't think changing the method of sale is going to change that. A good agent, regardless of the method of sale, is still going to extract a premium price for that property.
So, Rob, would you be happy with a compulsory disclosure of the reserve price during the auction?
I think once you've hit the reserve, I'm comfortable that be declared.
Okay.
And from a personal position, I'm comfortable that reserve be declared.
So it has to be declared.
A week out, however.
What about if
it's a campaign killer?
If you would accept that it had to be declared when it hit the reserve, would you be willing to say that it had to be declared at the start, prior to the start of the auction, immediately prior to the start of the auction? Say in the preamble?
No.
No.
Very comfortable once the reserve is hit, not before. And whether that's 10 minutes before, whether that's in the preamble of terms and conditions and special disclosures, or whether that's a week or two prior. But remember, we are also seeing that, or we have continued to see that shift in Victoria and other jurisdictions around pricing and pricing models and how a property is priced, how we arrive at that price, and how we market that price. So I'm not surprised that they've gone down this path in Victoria specifically. When you look at other methods of sale, private treaty, tender, etc., around how the price is positioned, price bands, offers from, all that kind of marketing and how that's changed over the years.
You said before that it might be an own goal. I suspect you could be right. I just heard of an instance in one of the far northern suburbs of Perth. Like, we're talking about as far from Perth as you can go before you hit Geraldton. It's a long way out. And the agent was saying that there is that they had it on the market in the early sixes, thinking that they'd get in the mids, so 650, 660. Offers came in at that plus, and then some rolled up to 7, and then someone came in at 750. 750, Rob. Now this was because there's no transparency at all. Like all that successful offer bid against themselves. Didn't have to go that high. As you said before, if they were standing on the front lawn going toe-to-toe with someone else, they would know that, well, all I ever had to do was pay like 702 for it.
So there's a great example, and there's a couple of reasons, obviously, in Perth, very different market conditions why that might be happening. And firstly, an abject lack of stock. There's no doubt about that. We, every few weeks we keep hitting record lows in terms of the stock availability, record highs in terms of turnover. Outside of that, in some of those far outer suburbs, there aren't enough sales, so there's not enough sales data sometimes for an agent or vendor to quantify what a comparable is. So that does make it challenging. And then you've got the fear of missing out. So we flip from fear of overpaying to fear of missing out. So you do see that from time to time. The question there, of course, being, and that's the unintended consequence, I think. Now, if that were an auction, perhaps that buyer may have paid a lot less, and that vendor may not have been as happy. And it is a fine line, but just remembering, most of the time, for those of us that act for a vendor, our job is to get the best possible price for that vendor. That is our job. And as long as I think it is done in a way that can be transparent, and I'm not saying our offer and acceptance format of selling isn't transparent. We're going to a vendor with information, with comparables, or in cases like some of these far suburbs where there's a lot of new constructions and very few resales, quite often we are going to both the vendor and the buyer and saying there isn't a lot of data. And we're saying to the buyer, and I'm seeing this from a lot of agents, saying, you need to tell us what you are prepared to pay. They are setting the market. These outer suburbs, the vendors aren't setting the market, the buyer is setting the market well and truly.
Yes. Yeah, that is fair to say. So as much as you're saying that you as a selling agent are there to act in the seller's best interest, and in the strict reading of the Real Estate and Business Agents Act you also have a duty to act not act unconscionably, and to be, like, I guess, fair. Where does all this, buyers bidding against themselves fall in this sort of sense of fairness in our society?
Yeah, look, I think, and again, ultimately, coming back to methods of sale, and this is where perhaps, at least in the Victorian case, it may be an own goal, in that, auction does provide quite actually a high level of transparency. And there'll be people who'll say, oh, yes, but auctioneers take bids from trees and buses and anything that goes by. Look, I don't think a lot of people are going to deny that didn't happen once upon a time.
Yes, it did.
There has been very strict penalties in place for a very long time around that. And I think anyone who conducts themselves with that behaviour today, would be marched out of the industry. And, anyone who's got any allegation of that should go and have a chat to the relevant authorities. And I don't think any, reputable agent has time for that. And, certainly don't. It's a reputational killer and no one wants to get into that sort of thing. I think, ultimately it really is though about being fair, as you said, with the buyer as well, because we do have a duty, but we also want to leave both parties with a smile on their face. You want to make your vendor happy. You've got to achieve a good price for them, and you want to know that, you've left nothing on the table for them. But ultimately, and I think it's just about being straight with the buyer and saying to the buyer, that offer's not going to cut it. Yes, Pete, you are going to increase your offer against yourself, and you might be the only buyer. Or we do have other buyers, but we have said to every buyer, you need to do better.
Rob, you say that you would like to see people both parties have a smile on their face, and that is so admirable and almost cute. I almost want to hug you, Rob.
Not always possible.
But I regularly come across agents who, when asked the question, well, what's your price guide? And they say something like clever, like, well, the property has only just hit the market. We're being guided by the market. What's your budget? And it's a way of saying nothing and then sucking some information out of the buyer, and then sort of kind of setting them up to think that maybe the property is worth, maybe they could get it for 7 when actually it's 950. And you never actually said that you could buy it for 7. It's just the way you phrased it that led someone to believe that might have been possible. And I see a lot of agents doing this. They're trained in these scripts and dialogues that do elicit that kind of belief. Is there something we can do there to stop that? Well, we never actually gave a price guide, but people actually believed that the price was much lower than it was.
Yeah, look, I mean, personally, I'm a big fan of when there is, market data to support a price, is generally either to give a range or a from price. And I think that's important. And, I find, and maybe it's some of the markets that I operate in, quite often the buyer will come to me wanting to make an offer under the from price. And from that point of view, it's a different education. It really is having a discussion in the bluntest terms saying, look, he's from that. We're not going to get anything under that. The vendor has said very clearly we're not accepting anything under that. So I think it starts with a conversation with the vendor, understanding their expectations, where they're at. And I think at the end of the day, you do have to be transparent with the buyer. I get that script or that particular dialogue probably is more of a fishing exercise to understand a little bit about that buyer. There might be better ways to go around that. Personally, I think so. I think at the end of the day, you work out pretty quickly if something's not in their budget. I think that's a pretty, there's some effective ways of doing that. And if we tie that back, I think, to what's happening in Victoria, a little bit of what they're doing is because of that guidance in that, and again, we're talking in particular less seasoned purchasers, first home buyers, perhaps, or even second home buyers. And I've always got to remind myself, we do this every day. So our terminology, the way we do things, it comes easy to us. To a buyer and a seller who may only transact a property once or twice in their entire lifetime, we've got to keep reminding ourselves, for them, this isn't easy, it's confusing and it's complicated. And I think a lot of what's been going on in Victoria and other states in particular has been not necessarily, and we'll just step back and say, I did say earlier, maybe to do with the price itself, but quite often to do with the cost of purchasing a property. So, you'll have situations where a buyer may have been led down a certain path that a property was within their price range. And in the Victorian case, distinctly different to WA, before they bid, they will go and do a building report, a building inspection, a termite or a timber pest inspection, get quotes, do a whole heap of things, get their finance, engage a broker or a buyer's agent and spend a considerable amount of money only to turn up to an auction quoted at, say, from $750, and the bidding opens at $850. That is very distinctly different to a competitive process in Western Australia where we can make an offer subject to a whole raft of conditions and not incur those costs until we know we are 100% in with a chance. That is a distinct difference, I think, of our system and every other state in the country. And probably, well, not probably, I think we'd say with absolute certainty, is why auctions aren't as popular in Western Australia as a method of sale.
The auctions have such a great, and I'm talking on-street auctions. It's theatre central. It's I actually don't mind, sitting there on a Saturday afternoon on Insta and just watching the different auctioneers that ply their trade. It's a bit of fun.
We've got some great auctioneers. And I think, look, even in Western Australia, we've got some fantastic auctioneers. And we've got some agencies that do auction well. And in their markets, it works. And in some markets, it works a lot better than others. And look, they'll tell you that as well. And I just think that, ultimately, and again, coming back to every property is different. Every purchaser and every seller's situation is different. In certain suburbs that I operate in, I wouldn't dare touch an auction because the buyer generally will be scared away from that, or the buyer's not in a position to make an unconditional offer. However, in other markets, in far more mature markets and far more seasoned markets around Perth Metro, there's heaps of suburbs where it is suited to and vendors where it's suited to. So I think, it really is one of those, unlike other states where, auction would be the absolute go-to and anything else would be secondary. In Western Australia, I think, there are discrete pockets where it definitely works and others where I think you just got to take a more rounded view on other methods.
Okay, so that's Victoria. Is there a chance that these kind of government interventions will land on our shores?
Look, I'm always reluctant to second guess what a government might do. Look, the West Australian government has been quite, I think, quite commercial in its approach to the real estate sector broadly, and I don't think the volume of auction and the number of concerns raised, and I don't think there are any concerns raised. So I think, there isn't the volume of complaints that there are in other jurisdictions. And I think that's got a lot to do with the way that our agents conduct themselves. We do have a robust auction code of conduct that's set by the Real Estate Institute of Western Australia, a reasonably robust auction sales act that's been around for a long time but seems to work. And I think, a small pool of auctioneers, but a very skilled pool of auctioneers in Western Australia. So whereby in other states it's open slather, in Western Australia it's still a licensed profession. It's a small pool of professionals, but they do it well. And I think that itself goes a long way to some pretty hardcore self-regulation. So in the auction scene, I don't think so. And I don't think we're going to see that contagion scenario where one state sneezes and, we sort of fall into line with a set of rules that perhaps aren't necessarily going to work in the interests of West Australian sellers and buyers.
So you mentioned about, government, you didn't want to bank yourself or back yourself in on, knowing what the government was going to do. So we've seen recently the Cook government announce Perth Park / the racetrack / whatever you want to call it, and almost at the same time announce some big changes to, shall we say, zoning laws. So they've put circles around train stations and said, basically, build what you want in those little circles. And I know that I've not explained that accurately at all, and that's okay. My point being, is there a chance that the government, because they have this massive mandate and almost no opposition, Robert, is there a chance that they might say, you know what, we're going to flex on the industry and we're going to make some big changes to the Real Estate and Business Agents Code of Conduct, for example?
Look, I think that's always a possibility, and we see that with governments generally, especially governments with large majorities. And I think we're seeing a symptom of that federally. with social media changes, a social media ban coming into effect in a couple of days on under 16s. And but there can also be a double-edged sword. And I think any government that goes into something so headstrong with a view that, well, we have a majority, we will do what we want, always suffers from that hubris. And, I'll take a Victorian example. Many would say that the Kennett government suffered that, losing an unlosable election through hubris, doing everything to legislate for the metro and forgetting about the country. Some would argue that that happened to the Keating government, that there was arrogance. Some would argue that that happened to the Howard government, and some would argue to some degree that that happened here in Western Australia to the Barnett government. And I think any government, state or federal, that forgets to be humble, I think is destined to fail, no matter the size of their majority, and no matter what disarray their oppositions at the time are in. And I think but I come back to it, and particularly state government. I think they're quite understanding to a large degree the housing problems in Western Australia, and quite acutely aware that the small effect, or the large effect, that small changes can have. So, if you have to touch it at all, touch it very lightly, whether that's planning law, whether that's tenants.
Which they haven't touched lightly.
No, well, this is going to be a very interesting one. And, I don't know how far the rabbit hole on this one we want to go. And full disclosure, I think it's important. We both live within metres of one of these zones. And I think we both know that our own council that we live in actually approved very, very similar planning changes some time ago. So I suspect that this is more aimed at perhaps a different string of suburbs than the ones you and I live in.
Western suburbs close to railway lines, and my God, there'll be some kickback against that.
So I think it's certainly directed at a suite of other suburbs. But I think, I think ultimately, and again, we talk there, these planning changes around rail lines and around their metro network, will go some way, a small way, towards relieving some of the housing problems that we're encountering in Western Australia and more broadly. And I think that is important. And I think that becomes a mindset shift towards a higher density living, which is a challenge for a lot of people. I understand that, but there is a large cohort of people currently living in Australia or who want to come to Australia who are quite comfortable with higher density living. And I think we've just got to really grapple with that there is a shift towards that. And we've seen that shift in Sydney and Melbourne and other places, and Brisbane in particular. And I don't think we're immune from that.
Back in the 60s, in the 60s, they built some high-rise buildings. You see them along Hampton Street in Burswood, King George, Leonard Street. Really big blocks of units, and that by the mid-'80s, or mid to late 80s, early 90s, they'd kind of become ghettos. They were not, they're not somewhere that you would say, oh, I really want to live in at 69 to 71 King George Street, for example. The government setting themselves up for a similar failure in 30 years' time?
Look, I know some of those well. I used to live opposite one of those. Look, I think the facilities available in those then and now are very different to the facilities I think that will be available in some of these newer developments. And I think that's probably key. And we talk about high rise. I mean, a lot of call it what you want, NIMBYs, let's call it that. I think a lot of NIMBYs will point at a lot of those brown brick constructions, and was it Brownlee Towers, I think was one, and we'll point at those and go, that's I think that's really in the past. We talk about high rise, and we talk about some of the stunning buildings just in Perth alone. Look at some of the developments in Rivervale, some of the new developments in Burswood on the peninsula, and in particular, look at Elizabeth Quay. Now, I know a lot of that is higher end living, but then complementing that all the way down St George's Terrace, Adelaide Terrace, and Hay Street. are a number of high-rise developments that are affordable, that are middle-of-the-road developments, both as rental accommodation and off-the-plan accommodation at the time, with good facilities, car parking, because that's a key issue, I think, for a lot of people in apartment living, large balconies and decks. So they are available out there.
Mm.
And I think, I think a lot of the current design guidelines, that require a lot of these, larger spaces, green spaces and all of that, I think really does change the dynamic away from, some of those towers of the 60s and 70s.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, my concern is that they will be, you'll squeeze a lot of people into one space, but the ones that are nice to live in, you won't be able to afford to be in there. Can we build enough affordable accommodation at scale?
That is, I think if we can solve that question and that problem, I think that's obviously the answer to our problems. I mean, we've got a massive demand side equation, and a very deficient supply side of the equation. And it's been like that for a long time. It's not a new problem. It's been something that groups like the Real Estate Institute, Property Council and others have been talking about for years, and a lot of government's just not listening.
So you're the deputy president at the Real Estate Institute. What's on REIWA's strategic agenda right now?
So, and this is going to sound like a cop-out, but we get to reset that agenda early.
This is sound like somebody I've just called for a price guide. Well, we're taking expressions of interest. What would you like on the agenda, Peter?
And really, a bit of that is almost taking expressions of interest from our members. So a lot of sounding from our members in terms of what they want going forward. But I think, the agenda for REIWA, I think, really is to be vigilant of the changes that are happening in our industry. And there's a lot of change happening in our industry. Mm-hmm. And I think just being both, vigilant towards that, but also ensuring that we're contemporary to those changes, to agents' needs and wants and what they want from their institute. Mm-hmm. And what they want their institute to be. We've spent a lot of time, or the executive team has spent a lot of time ensuring that our training is relevant, that we've got the right training systems going forward, that we are delivering courses that are relevant not just to agents, but the industry broadly and how that translates onto the consumer experience and how consumers are treated, both coming back to, for example, some of our other conversations around, honesty and fair dealing with buyers and sellers and everyone in that transaction. Mm-hmm. So a lot of focus on that and a lot of focus within REIWA just about ensuring that we are serving our members' interests, that we, become, I guess, a real beacon of good member experience. We've just...
What are the big things in your mind, the big ticket items coming up for the next 6 to 12 months, Rob?
Industry-wide or? Look, I think, we will probably see further reforms in the real estate sector, in particular within tenancy legislation. And again, I think some of that is really just coming into line with a number of changes that have been made in other jurisdictions over many, many years, and some of those more around minimum standards and compliance items. Not necessarily a scary thing. I think some of those, a lot of people, a lot of owners will look at them and go, that is a no-brainer. I think that on a lot of people's minds will be sustainability, and I think it's going to be a big key going forward. Mm-hmm. How that translates.
Why do you think that, Rob? Where's the demand for that coming from? Where's that? What's the signal aside from the people that have got a vested interest in peddling the message? Where's the demand coming from?
So I think the crux of it comes down to some of the big drivers within the industry more broadly, and they'll be insurers and banks. And I think
right.
And a lot of the data providers. So I think there's a fair bit of info out there that I think a lot of banks want to move towards a system where if a home is more energy efficient, ultimately cheaper mortgage, hopefully translating into cheaper energy prices and a better living standard in a home. Mm-hmm. But I think, when I
They're big levers. You've just used banks and banks and insurance. So if we've just seen the fires over in the New South Wales, and if insurance companies say, well, you are in a bushfire prone area, we're not going to insure you. If you can't get insurance, you can't get finance.
Right. So, and we find that now. So, for example, if we go back to some of those far outer suburbs, there's a number of those that sit within bushfire zones that some insurers won't touch, and some pretty hefty insurers that won't touch them. And there's some that will. And I think, again, that's coming back to just being mindful that some of those issues or concerns already exist. I liken the banking towards vehicles. So, some banks will preference better interest rates towards energy efficient vehicles or less emitting vehicles. So, similar situation there. And I guess really we could tie that into planning laws and building laws, touching on those coast fires in New South Wales just recently. A number of homes damaged and destroyed, and I noticed one completely unscathed, a recent build following all the recommended bushfire ratings and standards as set by the local government authority.
Really?
And the only home left standing in a certain patch. So
wow.
Whether that's good luck or good management or a combination of both, I think that's going to be probably a beacon of an example that, just maybe some of these methods are, they've got it right.
Okay, so the sustainability piece isn't going to come from people walking into a home open saying, we want solar panels and we want R6 insulation. It's going to come from the banks saying, if you buy a home with solar panels and R6 insulation, we will give you a cheaper interest rate by 1/4 percentage point or something like that.
I think that'll be one of the main drivers. I mean, there's no doubt there are buyers or tenants out there who do look for those things, but they're not a large proportion of the buying or renting population at this point in time. But I think those drivers will come from higher above. They will come from banks. They will come from insurers and or the levers of government. And we see that now. I mean, government's incentivising. And I'm talking broadly, not just in Western Australia, but around the country, different governments incentivising for different things, whether it is solar, insulation, changing from, say, gas to heat pump or electric to heat pump or gas to electric, battery storage, all kinds of different appliance combinations that are out there in different states. So we are seeing that slowly.
Okay. So what are the other big ones?
Look, I think they're probably some of the key things on the horizon. I think coming back to REIWA itself, we have a new CEO who's just started to bed himself in, and I think that's going to be a very exciting time for us as an industry, moving forward. He comes from.
He bought me a couple of beers the other night.
Excellent.
What a top guy.
A good guy, and I think just genuinely a good person with a really good customer service approach. And I think from our member experience perspective, I think he's he's really going to go the extra mile there in that regard. And I think some some very sort of broad lateral thinking around industry. He's not from our industry, but he is from a service-based industry. So I think, there's certainly going to echo some similarities there in what he's used to, but also I think bringing a new perspective as well, being somebody from outside of the property industry.
And is AML CTF a concern for agents yet, or are they still?
Look, for some agents it is, and I think like everything, there's always going to be pockets which pop up. And look, we had some recently that surfaced and said, "Oh, we don't know anything about AML. What's the Institute doing about AML?" And I think we've smashed out maybe 40 or so emails in the last couple of months, webinars, in-person briefings and whatnot. So there's always going to be a small subset that have ignored their emails or messages and whatnot. But look, a lot of agents understanding, firstly, why we have to do it. and they're understanding the reason or the rationale behind it. And a number of them, I think, taking comfort that there's a few operators out there now that can provide a streamlined solution for them. I think the challenge is going to be when it is fully implemented between the buyer and the seller. I think that's where the challenge is going to be, because there will be pushback. And, people have been taught for a very long time not to hand over information unnecessarily, and now all of a sudden their real estate agent or their accountant or their lawyer or a number of other people in that value chain are going to ask them for some information that they may not be comfortable sharing. And some questions they may not be comfortable answering. So I think that's going to take a lot of education with the Institute and their members, and a lot of education with our members and their customers, and explaining why this is necessary and why it's important.
Where are the big opportunities in real estate over the next 3 to 6 months?
So as an industry, or from a buyer's perspective, a seller's perspective?
Let's go from an industry's perspective.
So I think the biggest one, and always has been, is data, and I think that's going to be a big focus. And if we come back to AML, it's going to be the security of data and the security of that information that the agency is capturing for the government, and what we do with that, and has a very strict purpose, and communicating that to our clientele. And data on the flip side of the amount of data that is out there, and what can be done with that as an industry going forward and into the future, and how we make our agencies better.
Is there anything on the
agents of the future?
Is there anything on the horizon where you've seen, or you're seeing products in the development stage or in the early stages of adoption? Were you saying, well, wow, this could be a game changer?
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on in that AI space, and I don't think AI is a flash in the pan. I think there is a lot going on in that space. I think a lot of people are coming to terms again with the cost of AI. The amount of electricity it requires.
It is not free.
No, the amount of water and other resources it requires, but which sounds interesting when we're talking about computers, but they've got to be powered and they've got to be cooled. So I think there's a lot going on in that space in the property industry, and I think there's a lot of scope there. We're starting to see some of the data providers provide their clients with little snippets of AI modules and AI opportunities within their software. Talking particularly about the management software that we use within my office, there's a number of sort of AI modules built into it, just starting to come to the fore. And I think we've really only scratched the surface with that sort of thing. And again, the data opportunities that come from that.
Yeah, so we saw recently Nikki D'Agostino trialling an AI receptionist, AI support staff. It was pretty impressive. And what we're looking at there is a very juvenile version of what, you can imagine where it would go, where it would be in, let's say, 12, 18 months' time.
Absolutely. And I got the chance to trial it. She sent me the number and she said, can you ring this and put it through its paces? And you sit back and you go, gee, that's pretty good where we're at today. Where's that going to be in 2 or 3 years' time or 10 years' time? And we're seeing the same with reporting, inspection reporting. There's a number of AI modules available in reporting. So, whether that's, supporting tenancies and even the building sector, so there's a lot going on inside, I guess, that property ecosystem, and a lot of scope there when it comes to, what change that's going to bring to us.
Rob, you're first and foremost a husband and father, and then you're a real estate agent, and then you're the deputy president of REIWA. From a real estate agent's perspective, if someone wanted to do business with you, how would they get hold of you?
Look, Google me. That's probably the easiest one. Google Paddington Realty, my name. It's a pretty distinct name. So
yes, Robert Mandanici.
It's an easy one to find, even if you spell it wrong. So, it's not hard to find, even with the wrong spelling.
And if someone from the real estate industry wanted to reach out to you as a counsellor to chew your ear,
same way.
Are you open to that?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, all the time.
Okay. Rob, been great as usual. Thank you for your time. And until next time, this has been Peter Fletcher on the WA Property Q&A podcast. And that wraps up another episode of the WA Property Q&A. We hope you found our discussion valuable and gained some valuable insights into the world of property buying in Western Australia. Remember, while we strive to provide useful information, it's crucial to consult with the appropriate professionals before making any investment decisions. Don't forget to tune in next week for another exciting episode where we continue to unravel the mysteries of the WA property market. If you have any questions or topic suggestions, feel free to reach out to us. Until then, happy property hunting, and remember to seek the right advice for your personal circumstances. Thank you for listening.